Sorry. But not for response. Καλησπέρα. Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι και φίλοι, dear friends and colleagues here in the room and in the audience online. The audience online is much more plentiful than the audience in the room. That's something that's good. So, Professor Stefan Schmidt, originally from Basel, but a citizen of the world, as shown by his various teaching and research positions in Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean over the years, but most importantly by the many European and other languages he commands, including Greek, of course, as we all know, is Professor of Classical Archaeology at the Humboldt University to Berlin. Immediately after he finished high school in the Humanistisches Gymnasium in Basel, Switzerland, he came to the University of Athens for a term abroad. I do not believe this is something that many Swiss students do. In 1992 and 96, he received his master and PhD from the University of Basel with 2 studies on the fine ware pottery of the Nabateans. In 2002, he submitted his habilitation at the University of Paris-Sorbonne with a study on the Hellenistic pottery from the sanctuary of Apollo Daphnephoros at Eretria. His research interests include the archaeology and cultural history of the Mediterranean and the Near East from the late Bronze Age to the Roman period, as well as landscape archaeology, sedentarization processes, cultural exchanges, and methods and theories in archaeology. His primary focus of research was for many years in Greece and Jordan, but in the past 2 decades, he developed a special interest in Cyprus as well. Stefan started his archaeological career at the Archaeological Institute of Basel University in 1992, where he taught and assisted in the preparation of an exhibition on Petra and the Incense Road in Zurich. In 1996 and until 2002, he was appointed Deputy Director of the Swiss School of Archaeology in Athens. During this period, he also served as a Field Director of the Swiss excavations at Eretria and Euboea. From 2002 to 2008, he took several teaching positions as Professor of Archaeology, such as in Montpellier III in France, the University of Lausanne in Switzerland, and the University of Göttingen in Germany. From 2008 until today, he teaches classical archaeology at the Humboldt University. Within this time, he has already supervised 31 PhD candidates and is currently supervising another 10. This is a very impressive number, I must say. For about 30 years, Stefan has been conducting extensive field work in various projects and countries. One of the most important of these projects is his work at Petra in Jordan. He has also won various grants for his research, particularly from the highly competitive German Research Foundation. Amongst them, the program Kition Tamassos Idalion, or KIT. He is co-directing with Sabine Fourier from CNRS Lyon and Matthias Recke from the University of Frankfurt. He has published extensively and co-edited various books and papers on the topography and early research of Idalion, as well as several others on the archaeology of Petra, and organized various international conferences in Germany and in Cyprus. In the last 30 years, he has served, or is still serving, in various academic and editorial boards. He is the founder of the publication series Studia Cyprologica Beroliniensia, acting director of the Institute of Archaeology at Humboldt University, president of the German Greek Society Berlin, Vice Dean of the Faculty of Philosophy of the Humboldt University, corresponding member of the German Archaeological Institute, member of the Scientific Board of Cahiers du Centre de Chypriot and of the journals Syria and Jordan Journal of History and Archaeology, and many others. That was only a selection that I mentioned here. After Petra, and about 10 years ago, Stefan turned his attention to ancient Idalion and its archaeology. The incentive was offered by the study of material from Idalion that is kept in the Neues Museum in Berlin, and by the fact that much of it was found in excavations conducted in the 19th century by a German excavator under the name of Max Onefas Richter. Stefan and his teams revisited these excavations and used legacy data, older publications, archival material, and modern research and excavation methods to offer as an example how to approach sites that have been dug more than a century ago and how to find ways to make sense out of them. Thanks to the work of Professor Schmidt and his team, we can now begin to understand what was excavated at Idalion so long ago and rewrite the history of the Cypriot kingdom. In closing, I would like to share with you a thought. Just last week, we hosted a lecture by Yannis Violaris about the old interest of German scholars in Cypriot archaeology dating back to the mid-19th century. This interest vanished in the eve of the First World War, and it was only in the 1960s when Hans Gunder Buchholz from the University of Gießen and Franz Georg Mayer from the University of Zurich re-established a German and a Swiss interest in the archaeology of the island. Towards the end of the previous century, however, this excavation ceased, although there remains much to be published. Stefan Schmidt and the Humboldt University of Berlin, as well as Matthias Recke and the University of Frankfurt, are now to be credited with the revitalization of the German interest in Cypriot archaeology. Each year, they return to the island and continue to diligently excavate Idalion Damassos with their students, some of whom have actually undertaken to do research and write dissertations in various topics of the archaeology of the island. Thanks to their work, we are now able to talk not just about the past of German interest in Cyprus, but also about its future. The floor is yours, Stephanie. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ.
Καλησπέρα και από μένα. Χαίρομαι πολύ που είμαι εδώ για την πρόσκληση και ιδιαίτερα για την λίγο υποκριτική παρουσίαση στο Ποδήλιο. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming and for being here or there. Thanks a lot for the invitation and for the introduction. From your introduction onwards, I can only underscore what will follow. Now, what will follow? One of the reasons I left Switzerland rather early in my life is because I'm not very good in time management. So we will see how far we can get with the new researches and some old research in the sanctuary of a female deity in Idalion, which in the meantime we think can quite firmly identify with the sanctuary of the great female Cypriot goddess / in later periods Aphrodite that is sung by ancient poets, but later on that. What I'm presenting is, of course, the result of much collective work. A lot of people did directly and indirectly participate to this project and continue to participate. And since this usually comes at the end of such presentations and then it gets forgotten, I would like to start with it. We are very happy to profit from the support of the Cypriot authorities. And in no particular lining, I would like to mention the Ministry of Culture, as well as the University of Cyprus, because this is a co-project between the University of Cyprus, led from the University of Cyprus by Professor Yorgos Papasavvas and Humboldt Universität. And we do have quite dense cooperation with the Technical University in Lemessos, here represented by our colleague, Athos Agapiou. The picture is from last year, I think, when the colleagues were so kind to come to visit us. Of course, we cannot work without the support, the continuous support and overseeing by the Department of Antiquities. And it is a pleasure to thank the Department of Antiquities and its respective general directors, the last in the row, Yorgos Georgiou, here on the picture on the bottom right. Happily, we had support from the German embassy in Cyprus, here represented by the former ambassador, Her Excellency Anke Schlimm, who left a 3 months ago and is replaced by a new colleague, which I hopefully will have the occasion to meet sooner or later. We profit from the support of the local communities and stakeholders, I should add, and we are very glad to be able to count on manifold help by the mayor of, well, formerly Idali, now South Nicosia, ancient Idalion, I think is the official name. Stavros Hachianis helped us in manifold ways, not the least with making or giving at our at our use a tent, which is very useful when excavating in one of the highest locations in the neighborhood. And Photos for the Artist group is supporting us by varieties of in-kind support, which we amply profit, I'm able and well placed to say. So thank you very much for all these helps. And of course, a lot of people actually have profiting from these supports, have to carry out the actual work. A lot of students over the years from both our university, the University of Cyprus, as well as Humboldt-Universität, some of them on the pictures here, I'm unfortunately, due to lack of time, not able to name them all, as well as a lot of other people, scholars, pupils, for instance, from the local local Lycea, both in Dali as well as in Nicosia. This is mainly related to the continuous support of Dr. Anastasia Hamatsu, who is actually one reason why this project is taking care over so many years. I don't think I have to insist on the location, the topography, and so on of ancient Italian. So simply showing you the map realized by Magda and Max Onefalsch Richter in the very early 20th century, published in 1913, with the red dot indicating the inland, of course, location of ancient Italia. I will not go into details related to the history of research, otherwise we would do only this tonight. So please read through the very short list here, a history of research that starts roughly in the research, that's a broad, quite wide term, roughly in the mid-19th century, where we do have some sources we can count on. People used to visit and dig on the site earlier, I'm convinced, but the first really confirmed activities in the mid-19th century. I would like to point out two interesting facts. The fact that the Swedish Cyprus expedition did not work on the specific place, on the so-called Eastern Acropolis, but of course very intensively on the Western Acropolis. And this not working on the Eastern Acropolis by the Swedish Cyprus expedition, I think, is one of the reasons why we are able to carry out excavations there. And also the fact that in 1974, the American expedition to the Italian started excavating at the very specific site. Now, the date is unfortunately, I guess, quite familiar to most people in the audience. They weren't able to dig very far and had to leave the site unpromptly and without real preparation, and they weren't able to continue their activities. And I think these both elements we do owe something to these both not carried out excavations, so that from 2017, 18, we were able, after researching legacy material, archival material, to start doing field work on the spot. Well, the spot, I already mentioned it, is the so-called Eastern Acropolis, or with the now established toponym Muti du Arbili, which is here, or where the red arrows usually is pointing at. On the right side, you see a map established by Max Onefalsch Richter in 1894. Basically a very, very precise and exact plan. And the red arrow is always indicating the area of the modern house built here. Our excavation site is immediately in front of this house. The map here indicates part of the history of research. The different colors indicate the different excavations teams that did work in Italian. Without going into details, our site is situated on the very tip of the so-called Eastern Acropolis at this spot here. Exactly opposite, of course, you find the Western Acropolis, Ambelleri, a hill with the now established modern toponym, where, within others, the Swedish Cyprus expedition used to work, as I already referred to. Now, allow me a small thought, a small series of thoughts related to the history of research. On this map established by Louis de Maslatory, you see the dates here, who was of course much more interested in the Lusignan remains of Cyprus, but in order to do so did quite important studies on the topography of Cyprus, and one result is this really interesting map. When focusing on the area of Idalion, I hope you can see it. This is the road that leads from Idalion towards Lurgina, and then at the end to Larnaca, Kition on the other end. And on both sides of the road, this is the bluish zone. And as the legend to the map indicates, these are zones on all over the map where wine grapes are grown. And he explains that the toponyms do owe a little bit to this situation. And for him, as he explained, or as it is written here, you can see if you go from Dali towards Limbia, you can see two small elevations indicated on the left, on the northern side of the road. The lower one is called Mont Garvili, and the higher one is called Mont Ambilari. So for him, both the toponyms were located on the same side of the road, meaning that the lower hill of the western Acropolis he calls Garvili, while the upper part of the eastern Acropolis he calls Ambeliri. Others have both Acropolis to the west and to the east with the name of Ambeliri. So there's a lot of confusion going on. And why I'm referring to this, because we have to be very careful when dealing with objects found in the 19th century and indicated a provenance from Idalion Ambeliri. It may indeed come from what nowadays is Ambeliri, as is quite likely the case with the famous Idalion tablet. Everybody that describes where it was allegedly found concludes that it was found on the eastern hill, on the western hill, no matter how they call them. It may be different, however, with finds like these. These are slightly over life-size fragments of slightly over life-sized terracotta statues, all of female, well, both of female iconography, that match 100% the finds we do have from our place. And Colonna Cecaldi, who sold them to the Louvre, indicated as provenance Ambilleri, which nowadays would point to the Western Acropolis. But when writing about his discoveries, Colonna Cecaldi clearly says that, for instance, this statue here, now in the Louvre with the inventory number you can see over there, comes from the hill to the left of the path when you go from Dali towards Limbia, and there on the second, the higher one. Now remember the map by Louis de Maslatory. It's our find spot, it's the find spot where we have to change the chance to work, and it's called Ambilleri by de Maslatory, as it is called by Colonna Cecaldi. But it definitely, he says where it comes from. It's not the Western Acropolis, it's the Eastern Acropolis, and more specifically, the place we are working now, which actually fits perfectly with the iconography and the typology of the statue. And I do come back to this in a few minutes. So here we do not know more other than it comes from Idalion Ambilleri. Nobody says whether it is to the left or to the right side of the path, but given the iconography, the size, the typology, the material of this roughly life-size fragment of a left arm of a female statue, I would not be surprised if at the end it rather comes from the Eastern Acropolis than from the Western. Sorry, do I manage to go back? I do. In his text here, Colonna Cecaldi says that from what we will call now the Eastern Acropolis, the upper part, he saw there a lot of feet of big terracotta statues wearing beautiful shoes with richly ornamented decoration. And I'm showing you one such piece we found 2 or 3 years ago, life-size, slightly over life-size terracotta feet, which perfectly match his description, and nothing comparable ever was found by nobody on the Western Acropolis, the real hill of Ambilleri. So this, I think it's another confirmation of the fact that, at least for a good deal of the 19th century, Ambulary could be a lot of things. And we have, well, Western or Eastern Acropolis, and we have to be very careful and really go to the source in order to try to figure out where actually these things do come from. Here, starting with the map by Max Onefalsch-Richter, compared to the modern Google Earth view, and a digitized version by Sophie Horacek, just to very briefly indicate the genesis of our project. We started doing, we started doing a field survey. I will show you in a few seconds. I would like to add a couple of thoughts of why should somebody get interested in this site, although, as I will continue to insist, it has been excavated, dug, robbed out on many occasions in the past centuries. Well, one of the reasons is that a lot of our supposed knowledge, not all, be sure, but a lot of our supposed knowledge related to Iron Age Cypriot kingdoms actually goes back to the second half of the 19th century, as this composition of by then known Iron Age sanctuaries from Cyprus by Onefalsch-Richter in 1893 may show. Clearly, including, for instance, the famous sanctuary of Apollo Reshep in Idalion, shown here in a model realized by Reinhard Senf some years ago. Clearly, there are exceptions of this, well, it's not a rule of this fact, and I'm only very briefly mentioning the excavation by the Swedes of the sanctuary in Agia Irini, which definitely falls into another category than the 19th century excavations, including the modern museological exhibition here, the parts that went to Stockholm. A further point of interest of the sanctuaries, or dealing with the sanctuaries of Idalion, is the fact that there's a lot of, so we can clearly study one or several sanctuaries in their nearer and wider settling, as the map here established by Raphael Eser is likely to show. And there is the chronological and historical evolution, as everybody knows. Somewhere within the 5th century BCE, Idalion was conquered by the king of Kition, and it will be interesting to check and to try to understand whether this political historical fact does have any influence on the history of sanctuary sites like the one we are dealing with. So very briefly for the topography of the site, this here is the Western Acropolis, Ambulary, with the museum and the site excavated by the Department of Antiquities under Maria Hachikosti, and to the number A. Letter A here would be the sanctuary of Apollo Reshep, I've just shown in the model, and then starts the sloping of the Western Acropolis with here the house I had been pointing out, and roughly the letter C, where our site is to be located. Now, this picture gives you also an idea of the major difference between the Western Acropolis here and the Eastern Acropolis. The Western Acropolis actually is a single hill crop that pops out of the Mesoria plain. It is naturally fortified on 3 sides, and only here, this flank here is rather gently sloping and can be accessed without great effort, while the Eastern Acropolis does continue in a row of hills, literally towards Limbia, which may be one reason why it doesn't show such an early occupation, late Bronze Age, as does show the Western Acropolis. So far, and I'd say turning forward a little bit, so far we do not have any indication of human presence on our hill earlier than the 7th century BCE, which may change in the future, but for the time being, that's the issue. I show you a drone picture with the so-called ditch house I have been pointing out several times, and the upper plateau of the Eastern Acropolis, with the site we started, or we are still excavating since 2018 onwards, which, as you can see, is only a very small surface of the upper plateau of the Eastern Hill that we have been able to focus so far. Field survey in 2018, don't think I need to go into details, which confirmed, broadly speaking, the indications by Onefalsch-Richter from the late 19th century, mainly almost exclusively female iconography of thousands of terracotta and limestone fragments we were able to collect, and a rather dense concentration of such finds in the upper part, a little bit less in the lower part, but which may be due also to the extensive agricultural activities over the years, as you can see on the picture. Then in April 2019, we opened the first trench, which actually was one of the old trenches by Ohne Falsch-Richter, exactly at the site where the gentleman is sitting here on what turns out to be an extension of the city wall of ancient Idalion, which I will talk in a few minutes. Indeed, we were able, thanks to the precision, thanks to the high quality of the map, the plan by Ohne Falsch-Richter, to rather precisely localize his, what turns out to be his biggest sounding from the excavation campaign in 1894, including the so-called city wall. You can see in the modern picture as we excavated it in 2019. It's 4.4 meters large, and for us it remained at that moment of an unknown depth. We weren't able, due to restriction of times, to excavate towards the foundations. Ohne Falsch-Richter says it goes down for 4 meters. We will see whether he was right or not. Then in 2020, Apostolos Saris from the University of Cyprus carried out a geophysical survey of the entire site, indicating a lot of structures we slowly, when progressing, excavating, try to verify. And from 2021 onwards, we extended from Ohne Falsch-Richter's trench, you again see here, into a series of trenches and surfaces that these are the very latest one we finished in October 9, so roughly 3 weeks ago. So these would be the surfaces we were able to excavate, including this one here, in 2025. So let me give some indications and hints to what we found in the various sectors of our excavation. I combine this with the detailed stone plan. Red or reddish are constructions, walls built in mud brick, and grayish are constructions, walls built in stone. These strange lines do indicate holes opening directly dug into the rock, and we will have a look at some of them in the next few minutes. The 3D model by Stephen Götz of our site, indicating the excavated parts, but in their natural modern surrounding, show a quite interesting feature. It is the huge amount of debris that covers, not everywhere, because the rock is sloping from the south. This is the south towards the north, but nevertheless, if you look, for instance, at this area here, we do have close to 3 meters of debris, and we do not really know where it comes from and who put it that way over the ancient ruins. Since Ohne Falsch-Richter in 1893 was able or had to write that the entire hill, I remember he was excavating here and did some test trenches over here, the entire hill looks like a Swiss cheese, with a lot of diggings and holes here and some amounts of debris over there. So a rather different surface organization that we observe it nowadays. Sometimes we are able to clearly identify, not just identify, see, realize former activities, but really to ascribe them to specific known former activities. One such case is, of course, or are the excavations by Max Ohne Falsch-Richter. On top, you see a picture of his wife, Magda Ohne Falsch-Richter, in summer of 1894, sitting above a wall, which does a right angle with another smaller wall. On the lower picture, you see Tosca Negelmann from Humboldt-Universität sitting at with a slightly different headgear, but sitting at what we think is the same spot. Now, with the X or letter here, we indicate the fine spot of this pot. It's actually a jug of red clay, which, when put together, it's the left one here. I had never seen something like that, shame on me, And at first sight, with here these protuberances and something like that, you could think of a very, very old date of this specific jog. However, he has a rather good or perfect parallel on the right, which nowadays is in the Ethnographical Museum of Vienna. And it is for good reason that it is in the Ethnographical Museum of Vienna. That's a bodice of the 19th century made from red Kornos clay. And guess who sold it to the Ethnographical Museum in Vienna in 1890? Well, it was Max ohne Falsch-Richter. So we are pretty sure that our jug here is a simply water jug used by the workmen of ohne Falsch-Richter, who broke down and was left there when they backfilled the site. Another trench or previous excavation we think we can more or less precisely relate to former activities happens in this area here, and I'm showing you a specific stratigraphy, the eastern stratigraphy of this small trench we excavated this year, and I hope you can clearly see there's a rather systematic trench which goes, I mean, not completely in a right angle, but I mean rather well dug from topsoil down to the rock. And when I join the low quality, a little bit an older Google Earth satellite picture of the 2020s, these two dark zones do correspond to previous excavation trenches, and we are pretty sure that these are the test trenches dug by the American expedition, planning to extend, but as I pointed out earlier, forced to abandon in 1974. And this continues and continues and continues. So when excavating, it can be very much frustrating on the one hand that you dig down to the bedrock and actually have to realize that somebody did this before you. On the other hand, every once and then a few square centimeters, meters, if we are lucky, we still think we do have ancient remains in situ, and these are, how to say, paying out a lot of the otherwise pain we live in this area. And I'm going to present you a few of these finds. Now, here's something which the animation doesn't work. So I go back and show you this picture. I will continue speaking about this zone, 5 meters by 2.5 meters in the rather lower part of our so far excavation. This is a zone where, again, we had a lot of disturbances. As you can see, this area here is cleaned like with a tongue down to the bedrock, and it wasn't us who did so. While on the one side, as well on the other side, we still have ancient remains in situ, a hardish walking level containing a kind of mortar surface. I come back to this. And a little bit further away here in the foreground of the picture, a series of 6 or 7 pairs of clay feet directly put on the bedrock. So maximum they used a couple of small stones and the same material when touching it, the same material that they used for mud bricks in order to level a little bit, and then directly on this really, I mean, lousy leveling, they put up to life-size terracotta statues with their feet and of course the rest of the statue directly on the bedrock. I show you one pair here with the very beautiful sandals and a lot of rings on the toes, and we continue with the 3D model here of the feet in situ, then the zone cleaned by previous excavation, and the walking level to the left of the picture. Altogether, 6 or 7 pairs of feet, and one that is quite interesting is this one here. It has been really literally cut in the middle. Well, it's not exactly the middle. The left foot and 2 toes of the right foot were in situ. The rest was cut really neatly by somebody who previously excavated on this spot. The walking level I was pointing out would hit rather exactly the bedrock when ideally being leveled at the spot where we found the terracotta feet in situ. Above and mixed, I mean, these are in situ finds. Above this, in the debris, we have a lot, really an awful lot of fragments of not just, but also terracotta statues. And I would like to point out these few fragments because it is 3 eyes from a very similar clay, so probably from the same series of production. Now, these two may eventually belong together. They do not fit, but they could belong together. But since we have a third eye, we in all likelihood have at least two statues. And if they have physical relations in their body parts, these would be close to something like 2.4 meters of height. So slightly, well, not slightly, quite clearly over life size. I don't think to go, I don't need and do have no time to go into details of their iconography. They do confirm the well-established iconography of Italian terracotta sculpture, not the least by Sabine Fourier. Some statuettes do confirm also the iconography of, or the typology of what we can expect. For instance, the small, it's not too big, you see a 10 centimeters scale on the right part of the picture of a musician probably holding a lyra or a similar instrument in her hand. Most of them, or all of what I has been showing so far, from the Cyber-Archaic period. In the immediate next 5 by 2.5 square meters, the picture considerably changed. We had, just as a reminder, these are the terracotta feet with one strange squarish opening directly dug in the bedrock here. In the next area, we were excavation, the picture is exactly the reverse. We have a lot of, well, maybe up to 10 squarish openings directly cut in the rock, but only one pair, these here, one pair of terracotta feet. First, we were hesitating what to do with these openings, but when finding substantial fragments of limestone statues, with the statue here, you can see the 2 feet, the beginning of the garment, of the dress, the statues direct, cut in one piece with the plinth, really substantial plinth, and quite some fragments of the same type. We came to the conclusion that actually these openings were the bases, well, not the bases, were the negatives, were to put in the plinths directly related to the feet. I don't know, those of you who had an occasion to recently talk to or listen to a talk by or even visit the site of Matthias Recke in Tamassos, Firmgesa, over the past 2 years, he found something like 120 bases for limestone statues. We may have 3 in 7 years of excavation, but we do have all these openings in the rock. So we think, at least in that area, we were able to excavate the normal way for this sanctuary, how to put on limestone statues up to life size and over life size, was the one, like the terracotta statues, directly in contact with the bedrock. Now, typological, these statues should correspond to model. I'm going to show you a series of limestone statuettes, considerably lower dimensions, but with the advantage that they all come from Italian, from older excavations. We have small statuettes, we have a little bit more substantial statuettes, but it's difficult to find life-size or slightly over life-size statues in limestone, unless our own fragments we would need in order to fill these openings. And there is one good example. Unfortunately, it has no attested provenance. It comes from a former German private collection, the von der Heydt collection, and is now in the Riedberg Museum in Zurich. It's a 1.68 meters high, perfectly the same type. And when looking at its dimension, well, typological, I wouldn't claim it for exclusively Italian. I would say it's typologically one of these Meseoria types of limestone statues. So it may very well come from Italian, could come from Asos, anywhere in the nearer region as well. But what is interesting, when comparing the dimensions, it has the same size of feet and the same diameter, the same dimensions of plinth as does have this pair of feet we actually found. It is more or less life size, and we do have fragments of all various types. We have the life size variant, we have the over life-size variant. So here's a fragment of a female face, which fits, or was made to fit by Stephen Götz in an over life-size variant of the Riedberg statue, and the same for a slightly considerably under life-size fragment of a female chest. And I can add a recent discovery from this year. It's something like 25 centimeters high, so would correspond more or less to this type of statue of an act. I think it's from an absolutely fantastic quality, not necessarily related to its regularity. It's completely irregular, but it's a really nice expression of the technique of the stone cutters of that period, probably working freehand. We have had discussions with modern stone cutters, artists using this kind of stone, and I'm happy to mention Kyriakos Kallis at this occasion. He says this kind of stone, if wettening it, you can cut it with a knife, actually, at least for the details. This is what you should do, and which would explain some of these irregularities. Typologically, it perfectly fits even the Riedberg statue. So when imagine how the area I was pointing out could have looked like in antiquity, you come to about this kind of conclusion. And we figured out how it could look with the statue now in the Riedberg Museum in Zurich, repeatedly put in these openings, which indeed perfectly fit this kind of dimension and of quality and of typology of statue. Now, extending it a little bit, a first attempt of a 3D model of the excavated parts of our sanctuary, but all these are built rooms with a roof, but the roof is not here, so you can look inside it. We have one slightly over life-size terracotta statue I will show in a moment inside one of the rooms, looking at a 90-degree angle in another direction than the others. Here in the reddish color, you have the reconstructed clay terracotta statues in our sector with the terracotta statues, and in front of them the limestone statues here in a multiplication of the Riedberg example. I don't know whether we can make it until that point in my presentation, but in the area here, we were expecting the continuation of either terracotta feet or openings for limestone feet and statues, but we didn't find anything of this. But we found 4 to 6 holes on the rock, sometimes with a more or less roundish series of stones around. And to tell the truth, we don't really know what to make out of it. There's no clear indication what it could be. But looking at publications of other sanctuaries, one could eventually possibly think of plant holes. And here in the 3D model, we filled it with myrtle trees, myrtle bushes and trees, which would be the sacred tree of Aphrodite. Now, with all reservation, and I do not want to insist too much, all these statues are looking east. I mean, the terracotta statues, they have toes, so the toes usually look in the same direction than does the rest of your body. Otherwise, you have a problem. So we think all of them look in the direction of the rising sun. It may be a pure coincidence. I mean, every religion all over the world, I guess, has something to do with the rising sun. But if somebody reminds the few lines by Stephanos Byzantios about the foundation of Idalion, where King Chalkanara wandered around the area of Idalion until one of his officers or soldiers said, "I've seen the rising sun, Idalion, Basile." Who knows whether there's something to deal with this, but again, it's for the time being, it's more a joke than an archaeological reality, I would say. So I was talking about buildings, and I'm showing you here in red what we think first building phase of the sanctuary. So this is the Temenos wall. We think this is outside the sanctuary. This would be inside the sanctuary. In red, slight alteration. In yellow, a slight alteration, and again in yellow, now completely excavated a next building of the sanctuary. Then we do have the outside area, the hypateral area. This is the area where the statues do come from. And interestingly, so far it would correspond rather well to what we think we know of the spatial organization and the architecture of Iron Age Cyprus Sanctuary. Again, the model by Reinhard Senf of the Apollo Reshep Sanctuary. Further, so far we have a tendency, a rather good tendency, of a separation of the votives by material. Terracotta votives separated to a large extent from limestone votives, which may not be completely unusual for Cypriot sanctuaries. I'm referring here to the sketch by Markides of his excavation of the Arsos sanctuary, which unfortunately he never was able to publish in full. So it was done by the Swedish Cyprus expedition, who laid much more emphasis on the finds, the well-known finds from Arsos, than on the excavated site, actually. But here seems to be also a separation, at least of the areas where were found terracotta, fragments of terracotta statues and fragments of stone statuettes, as it says here. So maybe it is not completely unusual. In terms of chronology, we can clearly distinguish, broader phases of chronology. I have been showing you a lot of archaic, late archaic material so far, and indeed, when looking into the content, as well of the walking level here, as well of the fill, there's about 20 centimeters of fill between the bedrock and the walking level. The finds from there are exclusively archaic up to late Cyber-Archaic period, and you see a small selection here, including the huge eyes I was referring a few minutes ago, coming to another point where we do have a little bit, wrong direction. Talking about the area immediately to the temenos wall, so an area that is supposedly inside a building, where we were able to distinguish different layers of supports for floor slabs and next level of supports for next level of floor slabs, some with homogeneous pottery in between, and a lot of charcoal fragments where we tried to make sense out using C14 dating, facing the fact that we, of course, fell into the so-called Hallstatt plateau. So it's not very precise. We probably are more precise when looking at the finds, but it is clear that around 500, and really take it in the large sense of the word, the around, it may be 510, it may be 470, I really do not know from the available information, but around 500 BCE, something is happening. The archaic material is cut into pieces and a new floor is built with that material. In the same fill, we do extract a few fragments of arrowheads, as, by the way, was doing Onefald Richter in broadly the same area. Is there any connection between the arrowheads and the fact that something substantial changes in the sanctuary? One could think of different occasions, but I won't pull it too far. What we can clearly see is that afterwards, the sanctuary does continue with a lot of finds from the classical period. And towards the end of the classical period, we do have another major event, which results on the building of a massive fortification around the upper part of the Eastern Acropolis. So far, at least, this would be the acknowledged knowledge of the fortification of ancient Idalion. So far, the fortification wall of Idalion, of course, would incorporate the Western Acropolis, a part of the lower city, and also a part of the Eastern Hill, but ending at this spot here. And if you're looking at quite a series of plans, of maps dealing with ancient Idalion, indeed, the wall stops here. This is the lower part of the Eastern Acropolis. There is no whatsoever walling of the upper part of the Eastern Acropolis. And yet, already in 1894, Bonifaz Richter did excavate a part of the fortification wall, as I was pointing out earlier, quite an interesting part of the fortification wall, including stones bearing marks that he took it as Phoenician letters. So this would be Aleph, and indeed it looks quite neatly. I have to turn it in 90 degrees. It looks rather neatly like an Aleph. A lot of spolia stem from this part that was excavated in the 1880s and 1890s. As much as half a dozen of Cypriot capitals, including 2 of the 3 substantial Cypriot capitals that are nowadays exposed in the Archaeological Museum of Idalion. And so we are talking about this extension, this possible extension of the fortification of the eastern hill of Idalion. The most remarkable part that was extracted, one here and one here, is this stele. I do not want to go into details now in the Cyprus Museum. A stele which commonly and rightfully, I think so, is dated to the 4th century BCE and rather not to the beginning of the 4th century BCE, meaning that this would be, for the time being, the terminus ante quem non for the building of this extension of the fortification wall. It may be considerably later, I do not know, but it can't be earlier. And as I pointed out during the introduction, this is the part or a part of this fortification wall, of this massive fortification wall. Bonifaz Richter was excavating in 1894. We re-excavated in 2018. And this year, we tried to check whether indeed it continues more or less in the direction you would expect it. And out of this results this small trench on the upper part of the picture. And I'm referring to these very, on the map, on the plan, very lousy 5 or 6 stones, but nevertheless, these 5 or 6 stones, they go down for rather exactly 4 meters. And Bonifaz Richter pointed out it's 3.8, and they are constructed directly on the bedrock. So nowadays, in the actual preservation, there is a 3.8 meter high built wall with rather, you can discern, I hope, from the picture, different, I wouldn't call them building phases, but construction techniques, a rather carelessly one on the lower part and a little bit more careful one on the upper part. From the fill comes a lot of mud brick material. So in all likelihood, we should add, I don't know how much more, but an extension in height built in mud brick technique. And we had to stop excavating at this very point here because it's the end of the property. And then comes private property, but we should add the 4.4 meters of width of the wall, as we were able to confirm down here. And it's in a perfect alignment. So indeed, this wall is not a, how you say, an invention by Bonifaz Richter. It perfectly does exist. With the building of the wall, well, a part at least of the sanctuary may not have been, or at least not very well visible from outside the wall anymore. This is the highest part of the sanctuary buildings we can establish so far, and even when make it a 2-story building, which would be quite exceptional to tell the truth, well, it would reach to somewhere over here, and according to the angle of view you had as an outsider, you may not have been able to see a lot of the sanctuary from that point onwards. But the sanctuary continued to function. And I would like to add a couple of sectors, the 2 sectors in red here, which since then we were able to extend, where a substantial number, and I mean for what we are finding and doing, they're quite high quality findings, clearly related to the Hellenistic period, as the two under life-size charming ladies on the picture here. It's the same ones that we can see here. A lot of parallels that could be added from Hellenistic Cypriot sculpture, and a slightly larger lady, close to life-size, with a little bit more stronger expression, in her face with a beautiful diadem, by the way. These are her hairs, and this is a diadem, certainly imitating or indicating a metal diadem, plus then the veil she bears over her back head. Statues like this were indeed devoted as votives in the sanctuary in the Hellenistic period. And I have to come back to the area of the rock cut openings, because in the debris, not only the late archaic fragments of limestone statues were found, but also a Hellenistic plinth with the part of the corresponding statue with luckily a Greek alphabetic inscription indicating the name of a woman, Nikos, which, as you can see in the competition done by Daniela Summa, probably a mother giving the statue of her daughter. Nikos would be the mother, Nikiou, genitive, the daughter, to the goddess. The goddess is not named. There's just the beginning of Agathi Tichei, which in our opinion doesn't mean the goddess, but it's just a wish for good luck. This is the right foot, or part of the right foot of the statue here, and then come 3-4 folds of the garment. It's almost centimeter by centimeter the same organization of the statue's feet as we have seen in the life-size statue now in the Louvre, which I remember comes from our side, according to the guy who found it in the 19th century in Idalion. So this is the type of quite high quality and costly votives we have to reckon from the Hellenistic period, meaning that the sanctuary, despite the conquest by Kition in the 5th century, despite what may have happened towards the end of the 4th century with the building of the fort, hastily building of the extension of the fortification wall, the sanctuary very well continues, including high quality votives, meaning that there is a local or regional elite able to make the sanctuary working well into the Hellenistic period. Well, it's a small size example from the same time. And indeed, we can confirm this kind of typology by manifold but very small fragments. Here, a lot of hands holding either pyxides or kind of fruits. Some of them wearing rings, a lot of rings actually be worn by the ladies of our sanctuary. Rings that may have been occasionally also given as votives or lost by coincidence, as the 2 bronze rings we found on 2 occasions may confirm here. One of the more aesthetic is a very difficult thing, but a quite nice life-size head with a beautiful hairdress was found in 2023. Here, the interesting question is it a male head or is it a female head? 99% of whatever we find and can attribute an iconography, gender iconography, is female. However, we do have 1% of male iconography, including small terracotta statues of warriors, but really a handful of, compared to thousands of female fragments. Now, this head here, I wouldn't be surprised if it could be. I wouldn't be surprised. I have a tendency to understand it as a male head, as is the case with what nowadays is known as head of Apollo from the sanctuary of Apollo Resheb just down our hill. But when looking at the history of research, as you can see here, originally, simply because they couldn't imagine that a man looks like that in the late 19th and the early 20th century, this was understood as a head of Venus until, coming from a sanctuary of Apollo, it was made clear that this is simply a late classical or Hellenistic version of a rather effeminated head of Apollo, with in our case, this very beautiful hairdress. And when comparing, it's not exactly the same kind of hairdress, but clearly this is a head of Apollo coming from Ampurias, Greek emporion near modern Barcelona, I'm inclined to take also this one here as a Apollo. Interestingly, when we have a recognizable, how to say, godlike iconography from the Archaic period, it is the Cypriot Heracles. Call it Heracles, call it Heracles Melkart. We do have three statuettes of clearly this kind of late archaic Cypriot Heracles type, which disappears in the classical and Hellenistic period. And if the interpretation of this head as Apollo is correct, it would shift then to the Greek version of Apollo. And it's exactly the same shift that happens in the sanctuary of Apollo Reshep. The images of the god, most images from the sanctuary are actually votees, man, elite man with the Assyrian type beard, with the Egyptian type hairdress, whatever. The very few images of a deity from the Archaic period are the Cypriot Heracles. From the late classical Hellenistic period, they are the Greek Apollo. So we would walk parallel more or less to the evolution in the sanctuary of Apollo Reshep. Do you have another 10 minutes?
You must. Yeah.
If I must. Okay. I was indicating the one statue standing or found, parts of the statue found inside the building. It's this spot here. And you can see the one picture of the excavation. It looked like buried, intentionally buried, the feet. This is the back part of the dress, and the feet all made from from pieces of clay, from clay. It looked like buried by smaller statuettes of the Cypriot period, which I'm going to show you a few of them. Limestone in the middle and terracotta in the right, as well as a series of musicians from the same place. The quite Astarte type statuettes and mixed technique statuettes made from the form and partly handmade. The feet itself are remarkable for their quality. We have seen a picture of them later on, as well as from rests of their original painting. So it's really clearly a substantial statuette, at least of life-size dimension. We think was found in situ by us, because not the least we can't imagine somebody would have taken away the finds I was just showing you. Maybe to be connected with this also from the same type of clay and same dimension, left arm of a woman with beautiful bracelets and holding in her left hand this series of rings that have been interpreted variously as seals or maybe keys to the sanctuary. And I think to Jacqueline Karageorgis, we owe to interpretation of this kind of iconography as priestess or high priestess of the great Cypriot goddess, as the examples here on the right part of the slide may indicate. A little bit to the left, or to the upper part, to the right actually, the upper part. So here the feet were found 50 centimeters away from them, like sealed by this heavy stone. There's another kind of small depot of late archaic, Hellenistic sculpture of rather good quality. Just a comparison from our source. And when trying to understand, I'm skipping a few pictures, when trying to understand what happens, we affront some problems, because these, I mean, we took away for this picture the foundations, or the feet, the terracotta feet were standing on a substantial stone base or foundation. But here you can see where the late archaic feet have to be positioned, and here is the Hellenistic statuette, which was in one deposit with late archaic statuettes. So clearly there was a major turmoil, which certainly is an ancient turmoil, because no illegal excavator and no legal excavator would of course leave these finds there where we found them and leave the site without taking them. What I want to point out is that major changes and reorganizations of the sanctuary probably took place over the sanctuaries. And this is not an exception for cybrid sanctuaries, of course, and I will stop with this one here. If you have specific questions, I do have a few more slides. Also from Kition come, well, similar. I don't know whether they really are similar and comparable, but at least in Kition we know very well of this kind of deposits, excavated as well by the Swedish Cyprus expedition, as well as by the Department of Antiquities, dating the deposition like here to the 4th century BCE. But when zooming in, you can clearly see that the latest find, yet they do come from the 4th century BCE, but there clearly is some late archaic statuettes in the same deposits. So maybe we do witness a similar kind of situation here in our place. So in very short terms, this I hope gave you a first insight in what we have been able to do in the past years. I'm looking forward to a next occasion, maybe to continue a little bit in what happened then onwards. Thank you very much for your attention.